Hello, guys. Listen, there's something I need to talk about. The Federal Reserve was responsible for the Great Depression. And they're pulling the same old stuff all over again. They're pulling the same strings that they pulled to cause the Great Depression. There was a market run up all during the late 1920s. It was called the Roaring Twenties because there was money flowing through the system. And it was a tremendously powerful period in American history called the Roaring Twenties. In 1929, it ended. It ended with the stock market crash, and the Fed is responsible for this garbage. Let me turn the charts on right here. Okay, now we're going to take a look at one of the things that started this thing off, and in the 1929, after the 1929 crash, was the Tariff Act of 1930, called the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act. Now, does this remind you anything? This should remind you of what's going on right now. The Trump tariffs, the Smoot-Hawley tariffs. And it shows exactly where we are right now. If we take a look at the Dow Jones Industrial Average, we've had this going back in January. We had the peak, and we've had a drop-off. We haven't had a precipitous crash yet, but it's the same idea. We had the Roaring Twenties. Here was the Roaring Twenties leading up. Say the stock market going up and up and up to infinity, went all the way up to 26,600, right? And if I go back on the charts, go back a couple years, you take a look at this, you'll see that it was just like the Roaring Twenties. And go back to 5-year chart, look at it roaring up to this peak, this crescendo. Now the stock market has rolled over. It rolled over right here. This was a rollover in the stock market. We haven't had the big crash yet, not yet. But we're doing the same thing with this Smoot-Hawley tariff. That it come a little bit. The different things come a little bit different than the 1920s. The Smoot-Hawley tariff came after the crash in 1929, and we're having these tariffs right now. And we have only had a cooling off of the stock market. The stock market's rolled over, it hasn't crashed yet, but it's the same idea. We've got these tariffs that are paralleling the Smoot-Hawley tariffs of 1930, but there's more. Monetary policy by the Fed. What the Fed did during the Great Depression and how they brought on and they stimulated this Great Depression. And interest rates are one of the things that they're doing right now. Is the Fed is in a process of raising interest rates. Right? Now, in the 1920s, this is exactly what they did. Let's take a look at this chart right here. We come down on chart number 5 is the one I'm interested in. Interest rates. Now, what do we notice specifically about this? I wish there was a way to highlight this, but I'll explain to you what we're looking at. The charcoal gray line at the bottom that says short term. You see where it says figure 5 interest rates. Now take a look at the years down below there, 1920, 1929, 25, 1930. You'll notice that the Fed was in a rate tightening schedule, and they started out slow back through 1925. Well, what have they been doing, the Fed, with the interest rate hikes? They were starting out slow, 25 basis points to a time, for a while, and now they've increased the pace. Well, look here, in 1928, they increased the pace. They were at about 2.5%. Not a whole lot different than where they are today with interest rates. I think they're at, what, 2% right now. And they were about 2.5% or getting up near 3%, which is not a whole lot different. And then in 1928, about 1 year before the crash, they started an interest rate hiking schedule. And they raised it up, and they got it up to like 5%. This hike right here, you can see it in 1928, just a year before the crash, this interest rate hiking schedule. But you notice what happened here when the crash occurred? Right here, 1929 crash. Look at this gray line. You see what happened right here? As soon as the crash occurred, they dropped those rates down to the 0 mark. Boom, just like that. The rates. So you see the crash in the rate, the short-term rate, the gray line at the bottom. Look at 1929. Look at it crashed, and they knocked it all the way down to 0% interest rate. And in fact, it looks like they went. Did they go below 0 here? Anyway, they went all the way back down to 0 again with the interest rates. What do you think the Fed's going to do this time when the next crash comes in the stock market? They're going to go back down to 0 interest rate policy, but also at the same time they're going to increase they're going to go back to a monetary policy, a loose money monetary policy. This is the whole thing. They're like a rat that comes out of a hole, you know, and as soon as he spots trouble, he's going to run back in that hole again. That's what they're going to do. The Fed, they're really a bunch of doves. They're pretending to be right now like they're a bunch of hawks, but the truth of the matter is when the trouble comes, they all run back to their safety, which is dropping interest rates down to 0. But this time, dropping it down to 0 ain't going to do it. They're going to have to go negative. There's going to be bank runs because people are not going to put up with negative interest rate policy. Because what it's going to do is it's going to start to dip into your money that's in the bank. And at the same time, when these banks start to get in trouble, we're going to see them try to take your money out of the bank. There's going to be bank runs just like there was in the great crash in 1929. We're headed for the same policies all over again as the crash in 1929. It's the same things that are lining up, but this time it's even worse because this time the whole dollar has been undermined as a national reserve, the world reserve currency. This time, the beneficiary of this crash is not going to be the dollar. This time, gold and silver is going to be the big beneficiary of this crash, and it's going to have a bleed over effect into the cryptocurrencies that has already begun. There's going to be an awful lot of fear with this situation when it hits. This crash, and there's going to be two parts to this crash. There's going to be the deflationary part, which is going to be the first part, and the second part, which is the hyperinflationary part, which is going to be the driving force for gold, silver, and cryptocurrencies. And it's going to be the destruction of the fiat currencies. Fiat currencies are going to finally die the death that they deserve. So listen, thank you guys for listening to this report, and we'll catch you in the next show. Bye-bye.